welcome everyone. Good morning and welcome to our Protiviti and Robert Half Collaboration Forum. My name is Paul Middleton and I'm joined here today by my colleagues from Protiviti and our sister company Robert Half. This is our weekly collaboration forum and this is week 3 of our new series, a 5th and final series that will take us up to the end of English lockdown on June the 21st, we hope. Since March of last year, our weekly forum has been aiming to invigorate, challenge and inspire us all to be bold, to look beyond these computer screens and to stand up and think differently, as well as to bring optimism in what has been for so many a time of disruption, uncertainty and often change. Over the months, our forum has become a place for today's business leaders, as well as our leaders of tomorrow, to talk to each other, learn from each other, challenge each other and gain confidence from each other's perspectives and experiences. And that aim is the same today as it's always been. This is your forum. This is not a closed forum. You're not muted and it's pretty informal. And I urge you all to get involved, make your voice heard, share your opinion and get the most of it you can before you go and cast your votes later. A thread that's run through all of our forums is that now is the time to think differently and to be actioning both big and small ideas. Put differently, we believe at Robert Half and Protiviti that if we don't proactively drive change during this continued period of disruption, we run the risk of rapidly becoming irrelevant and falling behind the pack. But there is another danger now. A danger that's quietly lurking for all of us, a tipping point that we are rapidly approaching as we begin to unlock and we spend a little more time face to face with our colleagues and move out of our home offices and dust off our office desks. And that danger is that we sleepwalk back into our old working habits and we leave behind our COVID mindsets. A mindset that's given us a newfound ability to drive change at a rate we previously thought impossible, to achieve things we were told that could not be done, and suddenly be able to overcome barriers that previously seemed unscalable. In other words, over the last 13 months, we've successfully broken an office-based 9-to-5 working pattern that's been with us since the Industrial Revolution. And our challenge to you all in this forum is not to march backwards and fall into your old habits and lose everything that you've achieved. Because if we do, you can be sure that others won't and will simply fall behind. Instead, let's be bold, imagine what the future can be and how we can grasp it. And that's exactly what we're going to do over the coming weeks on this forum. So we've already looked at culture, we've already looked at success, and this week we're looking at the future of healthcare. Further weeks we're looking at the future of social justice, ESG, retail, entertainment and many more topics, and digging into how you can shape that future and build on what we've achieved and not sleepwalk back to the past. As I said, today we're looking at the future of healthcare, a world that while many of you do not work in directly, is likely to have a significant bearing on our personal lives, our families and our workplace in the future. Over the last 14 months, our healthcare systems have come under strain like never before, and our reliance on them is greater than ever. Yet with challenge comes resilience, progress and huge achievement. How has the industry evolved over the last 12 months? What can you learn from this? What have been the advances that will change your healthcare experience? How is return to work going to impact your mental health? And what should the future of healthcare look like in our new digital hybrid world? And what does that mean for you? These are just some of the topics we'll cover today. To help us do that, I'm delighted to say that we're joined here by 3 healthcare experts to inspire, challenge and guide our discussion. Firstly, I'm delighted to welcome back Tim Sachs to our forum. Tim is the head of operations for the COVID vaccination programme in the Midlands and has worked for the NHS for over 17 years. Before his current role, Tim was the COO of East Leicestershire and Rutland Clinical Commissioning Group, where he partnered with clinicians, regulators, councils and patient groups across the healthcare and social care sectors. Tim's joined this forum back in April last year to talk about the challenges faced by GP surgeries in the face of the pandemic. And we're excited to have him back here today to share his insights around the vaccine programme and the wider healthcare trends that he sees. Next, I'm delighted to introduce Wais Shaifta, who is CEO at PushDoctor. PushDoctor is one of the leading digital healthcare companies in Europe. Wais and his team partner with the NHS to connect thousands of patients each week with clinicians and appointments which are available in minutes. Before joining PushDoctor, Wais was previously Director of Global Operations at Europe's largest online beauty marketplace, Treatwell, And prior to that, he spent 6 years with Just Eat as Director of International Operations. And as you'll hear today, Wais and his team are disrupting the healthcare space, bringing new ideas that are likely to shape how you, your family, and your companies may access and experience healthcare in the future. So thank you, Wais, for joining us today. And next, I'd like to welcome back Nair. Raj was appointed a consultant urological surgeon at Guy's and St Thomas's NHS Foundation in 2017. He cares for patients with all urological malignancies with specific expertise in the investigation of bladder and kidney cancer and performs a range of diagnostic and surgical treatments for these conditions. He's a special interest in open laparoscopic and robotic-assisted surgery, as well as reconstructive urological surgery. He's a leader in his field, and Raj joined us last year in this forum to give us insights into how hospitals were coping with COVID. And he joins us again today to give us an updated insight from the medical front line and to consider how the last year or so will have impacted the future of healthcare as he sees it. I'm pleased to say that our team here at Protiviti works with Raj and his fundraising team on a number of important initiatives, and we're delighted that he can join us today. So thank you all for joining us. And Tim, if I may start with you. Here in the UK, we have one of the world's most successful vaccination programs, which you are very much part of. What's made this so successful, and how have you collaborated with other areas of the NHS and government, and how have you overcome some of the key challenges that you've seen along the way?
Thanks, Paul. Morning, everyone. This is a most fascinating programme I've ever worked in, and possibly the most rewarding. But one of the interesting elements and why it's been so successful actually goes back to the fact that for the first time in many, many years, the NHS went on a full command and control structure. Basically, everything was done from the top. There was no deviation. It's really interesting, actually, because each region, each hospital, each general practice is normally allowed to deliver the healthcare using a model of their choice, obviously within rules and guidelines. But this came down from on high, that basically each and every vaccine is owned by the Secretary of State for Health, which basically means that he is responsible for everything that happens, which has actually meant that we've had to do things in a way that most people found really quite difficult. Being told what to do is not normally what medical professionals are used to. And actually, in a way, it is the reason for the success, the fact that we have a single system, the fact that everything is linked and joined up, the fact that we have patient records that can be accessed has been the key element of the success that we've had. And I must say, the openness and willingness across the country to enable this to work. And giving you examples, if you want to, in the region that we're in, there's not an arena or a table tennis club or a showground that isn't delivering vaccine at the moment. It's quite incredible the amount of altruism that has taken place, people not charging for using the facilities, people opening up and enabling vaccine to be delivered across huge areas. We've got nearly 400 vaccination sites in the Midlands. I mean, it's a pretty big patch going from Wales to the East Coast. However, the ability of clinicians and particularly huge numbers, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of volunteers who have made this happen. We've had, I think, some of the biggest innovations that have enabled this is new roles, vaccinators. You know, we've never had a role as a vaccinator before. People being trained very quickly to enable that to happen. Near to where I live in Rutland in the East Midlands, and in the site that we've got here, on an average day to vaccinate 1,000 people, you need 100 people working there. You know, it's a really labour-intensive job, but of that, about 80 of those are volunteers and incredibly willing to do it. You compare our system, I think, to some in other countries, and I think Israel's probably had the most successful vaccination campaign after ours. But the fact is, we've worked as one. The NHS has never been better than it has at this time. It's never worked together better. People have put in so much over and above. It's the people that's created this. Oh yeah, and the tens of billions of pounds that have been thrown at it, which obviously makes a real difference. But if you look at the money, it's the people that's made the difference. And the fact that everybody has really enabled a process to happen because of the fact that everyone wants to get back to normal. You know, this isn't just a normal campaign. It's not like giving the flu vaccination, which helps everybody, you know, so they can have a decent winter. This is about getting the whole country back up and running. So I think actually what we found here is the most innovative of programs based on the most totalitarian of processes, but actually it's really worked quite well.
No, thank you, Tim. And I'll come back to you shortly and look at the future of where you see that, how you see that evolving going forward. But Wais, if I may just come to you and just tell us, Wais, if you can, then a little bit about you and your team at Push Doctor and how you've been working with the NHS over the last year and some developments you've been spearheading to revolutionise what you see as primary care.
Yeah, no, thank you, Paul, and good morning, everybody. And yeah, no, I mean, for us, the challenge was quite immediate. You have pre-COVID, 99% of consultations happening face to face, and all of a sudden, face to face goes away, and over, all consultations have to either be done digitally or over the phone. So initially, fortunately for us, in a world pre-COVID, we were seeing a lot of adoption around some of our digital technology. So just at a high level, Push Doctor offers a number of different digital solutions, but the most successful we have is a video consultation platform, which helps surgery support with their demand. So we had a number of these digital solutions available beforehand, but what we then saw was a sector which heavily had to adopt a different way of consulting, and then ultimately, how do we do that? And we serve around 6 million patients, over 500 GP practices in our areas, and they were quite accustomed to how to use it. But then we had a huge volume of others wanting to do something similar, but as you could probably appreciate, highly analog, move into digital. So actually, we had to really invest in our operational team. And what's made Push Doctor grow and be successful is we have had to do a lot of hand-holding. And I've done this at Just Eat, we've done this at Treatwell. You can't expect, and I think what's happened historically within the NHS is we've given the NHS technology and we've said, hey, here's some technology, here's some Skype, now go use it. And whenever you do that without an approach, I think it doesn't get adopted. And the thing that we've done, because it is quite significant, we've invested millions of pounds in our operations team, but ultimately there is a hand-holding process. Every single GP surgery has an account manager, every single relationship manager, every single GP has a audit governance team. We have a full structure which supports every single practice and is continuously engaging with them to ensure they know how to use the technology, how it can be efficient. And actually the key thing is they're our product team. They ultimately feed back what they need, and that fits our product roadmap. So we, at the beginning, if I'm being completely frank, there was a bit of chaos. There was a bit of concern. But probably similar to what Tim mentioned, there was a complete team effort on how do we see patients at a time where we can't do it historically, we can't do it face to face. And there was such a keenness to do it. And thankfully, through our technology, we were able to support our current user base, but also those outside of the base.
Thank you, Wais. And again, we'll dig into that in a little bit of time, just to see exactly how you think that's going to evolve. But Raj, if I may come to you, you spoke at our forum last year during the height of the pandemic. Can you give us now some insight from the front line on the lasting effects of the pandemic on your world and the challenges you have in providing ongoing patient care, please?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, thanks for having me. One of my highlights of the pandemic is joining your forum in a way, just to speak to a different body of individuals who are interested in healthcare and healthcare technology and what's going on. I mean, I totally echo Tim and Wais's comments. Actually, in what they're saying, there was a need for a change, and that there was a radical need for a change at the time of the pandemic, and it was very much a model from the top. There were, clearly higher powers have got together and formulated a plan, and that plan was disseminated amongst multiple hospitals, GPs, institutions about how they manage not only the vaccine program, but how they manage their operating capacity, intensive care capacity, and their resources, and that's what we saw. And in my world where I operate and I do surgery, it's our operating capacity had significantly dropped. Staff were redeployed into intensive care units or becoming vaccinators, and including myself, and consultations, the way we interacted with patients had to be very, very different. And you know, we were just literally overnight we were told we couldn't have more than 20 people in a particular waiting room, and then that limits the number of people you have that you can see, and that limits the number of consultations you have. That means that your number of referrals that are waiting to be seen for cancer or non-cancer purposes increase, and it all becomes a backlog and a problem. And we've used video conferencing and teleconsultations as part of our armamentarium in interacting with patients. And when we talk about the future, I think this is certainly something that will stay. I think that's one of the huge positives that's come out of the pandemic is changing the way we interact with individuals. And of course, it's all about collaboration with and sensible conversations with others in other departments and your colleagues. You know, there are things that are urgent and there are things that are not so urgent. And at that time, there was a huge rush in determining what needed to be done quickly. Otherwise, it would be life, limb, or life quality of life threatening, and everything else just had to wait. And now we're in a position where we have to start dealing with the everything else, and that's the hard bit, because you're still coming out of a situation with a very tired workforce. You still have limited capacity, mainly because you have workforce issues, or in that period of time people have decided to start rebuilding or refurbishing, and you've got a huge inflow of patients that's just about to start or has already started with a limited outflow, so there's not much capacity to deal with it. So this is the big problem that we're going to have to deal with in the NHS now.
So Raj, just give us a flavour of that. I mean, so how big are your waiting lists compared to where they were kind of pre-pandemic?
Yeah, so pre-pandemic, we weren't too bad. I mean, I would say that, I'll give a very classic, a clear example is, often people who had prostate-related issues and go into retention where they can't pee and have to have a catheter. That's a tube through the penis into the bladder. These people, we don't like them waiting with tubes hanging out of them, for long. And so we tend to say, look, we do our best to try and get your operation done within a month, okay? And this is coming from a well-managed waiting list in the Central London Hospital. It may not necessarily be the case elsewhere in the country, but we do try. Right now, we wouldn't even be able to hit 6 months, I don't think, in terms of getting those kind of operations done, and that's the reality of it. And I it's because cancer cases trump these things, and so we have to use that capacity for cancer-related work. And there was a statistic that was floated around recently saying a 3-month hiatus in elective operating will take us about nearly 2.5 years to catch up with. And that's huge. That's on top of the workload that's just about to pile in.
Wow.
So it's not a joke, and it's a serious, it's a real serious thing, because it's not only going to affect obviously the patients that are waiting, because I mean I feel so sorry for all those individuals who are awaiting knee replacements, hip replacements, elective orthopedic surgery, elective urology or ENT surgery. But it's going to affect staffing, it's going to affect morale, it's going to people. The knee-jerk reaction to a lot of these things is try and do more in the shortest space of time, and we don't know how that's going to pan out with the quality that one delivers. And so it's really important that we maintain a really high quality of service, as most units do provide, without compromising on patient care.
Yeah. So Tim, thank you for that, Raj. But Tim, coming back to you, is this going to become more acute and worse? Because at some point, you described this military operation, the 1-to-10 ratio and the labour-intensive nature of vaccinations. At some point, that's going to move from what you described as this military-style approach to vaccination that's business as usual, booster vaccinations and routine vaccinations. How are we going to make that transition, and what will that future vaccination programme look like?
Yeah, we're right in the middle of planning that at the moment, and it came out in the news over the last couple of days about September boosters. There's two plans. There's plan A and plan B, and we'll probably end up having plan A and a half, actually, I think, the way it will work. is at the moment, everyone who's eligible for a flu vaccination would get a booster. That booster would likely be a vaccine they hadn't already had. So if you've had Pfizer, you'd have AstraZeneca or Moderna, or we've now got Novavax coming through the system, possibly Johnson & Johnson in the coming weeks. I think by next year, we might have 7 different vaccines. So the plan at the moment is to have a program which is concomitant with the flu vaccine. So if the clinical trials work, you'd be able to have your flu vaccine and your COVID booster on the same day. They would aim to get all clinically extremely vulnerable and over 50s vaccinated this winter. That's not necessarily going to happen. I think if some of the clinical trials show that you can't have flu and your COVID at the same time, that totally changes the capacity issue. And there may need to be a very different model. Plan B is that all of us get a booster from January, February time. And that would be a booster which would have already, if they, again, very clever clinical trial people dependent, making sure the variants are covered within the new vaccine, and then would all get something in January. Now, the planning for that is enormous. And the reason why is that the program is starting to really, how do I put this nicely? The program is starting not to stutter, but going back to Raju's point, the workforce is becoming a real issue. The general public want healthcare services back to the way they were. They're seeing the pandemic coming to an end, and we're starting to hit real workforce problems because the expectations on our secondary care colleagues, on our primary care colleagues, are that we go back to how things were done before, and people are exhausted. They've been working very hard, and the volunteers, now the weather's getting nicer and the world is opening up, are less likely to volunteer. It's getting harder. So we're coming into that point where we need to find a program with longevity that works both for the public and clinicians, and that's going to be quite an interesting kind of quandary that we need to solve over the next 6 to 8 weeks.
And so, thank you, Tim. And Wais, then, from your perspective, is that change in vaccination, or rather that ongoing demand in vaccinations, is that going to cause a pinch point in primary care? So will GP surgeries have capacity, from what you see, to meet the ongoing demand for vaccinations? Because that's just going to cause roadblocks to everything that Raj is talking about. That 3-month hiatus is going to take 2 years to catch up. Is that just going to make the system worse? And how do you see the solution to that?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, when we work with our partners, the thing that we've seen is how do these appointments get triaged? So if you look at it in a historical world, you're phoning your receptionist, he'll point you to your GP, and then your GP will then route you to the right person. And what we work with our practices is, well, how do we make that a bit more efficient? So, the ones that we partner with, you download the app, you'd say, I have a mental health issue, I'm feeling a bit anxious, I have a panic attack, etc. We will then triage you to a mental health specialist immediately with the right conditions, right diagnosis, etc. So the aim really is to get you to the right point of care first time around. And when it comes to things such as a vaccination program, and we've seen some, everybody has done a brilliant job in executing it. We've had some who have used their own internal GP resources only, as opposed to nurses or pharmacists, etc. And what we've said is, and what we're trying to work with our practices is how do we make the triaging a bit more efficient? How do we get you to the right type of care first time? Because I think what happens a lot in our sector is you have 2 or 3 or 4 touch points before you get to the right touch point, and that accumulation, if we can improve that, then we can improve appointment times by 20-30% quite quickly. So the work that we're trying to do is, outside of it, and actually another thing that makes it quite beneficial in how we do things is, in a historic model, you've got a GP practice with 2 or so partners and a couple of locums dedicated to that primary care network. You could be a clinician in Manchester and working for a practice in London, really being able to move the demand and the clinicians to support in and around where the demand is needed, rather than just being an individual practice. I think how we efficiently do that is quite important. And where we are from a push doctor perspective is 2 things really help us with that. So one, we partner with pharmacies, with physicians, with all parts of the ecosystem, and they at a first touch try and support with all the demand they have quite efficiently, so all the burden isn't with the GP. And the second piece that we have is we have an API layer which sits on top of every single clinical system within the NHS. So what that ultimately means is when that pharmacist is consulting with you through consent, they have full access to your data. So then actually they can update the medical record in real time, and therefore there isn't further administrative burden. I mean, just from an administrative burden, it costs the NHS 10 billion in administration per year, and that's just simple paperwork and all the other burdens that there are. So from our perspective, it's, you know, probably going back to your question, is how do we get you to the right type of care? And I think we're seeing a lot more efficiencies there, and I think having that available will make the system more robust.
So Wais, I'd like to summarise that. You're talking about kind of integrated data sets, the ability for any clinician to access a patient's data, making the right decisions, triaging better. So basically applying that use of technology so that the patient sees the right person at the right time, and there's that common data set. I mean, Raj, if I come back to you with that, is that how clinicians and hospitals can operate going forward? You know, is that where you see these integrated data sets and these let's call it like a better patient journey? Can that begin to unlock some of that demand that will be coming back to your world?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I think one thing the National Health Service lacks when you compare it to healthcare organizations across the world is the ability to accurately collate data and process that data in sort of real time. There's often a little bit of a lag, and that's been one of the faults. If you look at sort of the American healthcare system, everything has a cost associated with it. Everything's put into a system by coders, by people who are employed to directly transcribe that patient, you know, to provide a monetary value for that patient journey into some sort of a spreadsheet that then generates, you know, that accurately reflects the income and needs for that individual. I mean, we're slightly behind on that because we deal with things, we deal with tariffs, and we just apply a fee based on some sort of evidence base behind it as to a particular organization, you know, a procedure or a length of or inpatient stay. The problem is that this is all data. You know, things have changed. Inflation, cost of healthcare has changed over the last 10 years, and those figures don't necessarily represent what is actually the cost and the accuracy of what's happening now. And I think that I'm just using this as an example, but this probably filters into other areas. So there is a need for better data collection. There's a need for much more accurate data in the healthcare system, and then of course then using that we can predict exactly, we can sort of quantify that patient journey a little bit more accurately. I have to say though, with the vaccination program and our management of COVID-19 in the UK, it's been very, very good when you compare it to other countries. And Tim will probably agree with this, is our ability to gather data from patients who have COVID and I've been sitting in hospital meetings here where we can predict, based purely on how our hospital is behaving in terms of our bed status, our ITU status for COVID patients, when the next wave is going to happen, and feed that back directly centrally. And that kind of amazing ability to detect patterns and learn from our period from the first wave has really informed what's going to happen, you know, in a potential third or fourth wave that may or may not happen. We've got this data, we've got the experience there. So I think we learn quickly. And Tim, I think would you? I'm going to put this question to you. Would you agree with me on that?
Entirely. I think two really important things have happened over the last year. One, just going back to Wais's point, the move from general practice, particularly, to using video consultation. There's it's not a competing product to Push Doctor, but something called AccuRx, which is something being used. And my wife, who's a GP, basically now can have a consultation with someone over video conference. They've got, say, a dermatological problem. She can send them a link. They send them safely a photo to her, which goes directly onto the records. She can then make a quick diagnosis. That all can happen in an 8-minute consultation. I mean, that's dream world from what happened in general practice even 2 years ago. So things like that, the online consultation, the world of Push Doctor and online has changed everything, and has certainly helped with that. Coming on to data, I mean, I have more information on a daily basis. We use a system called Foundry, which no one had ever really heard from. It's an organization called Palantir. And the level of data on a patient level that we can look at to understand cohort penetration, people who specifically need vaccinating, literally by practice, by postcode, by MSOA. We can look at every element where there are gaps which are created potentially by deprivation or ethnicity. We can literally go in there and say, right, that street, we've got no one vaccinated and they've got a high level of COVID, and we've been able to go in there and knock on doors and vaccinate people. I mean, we've never been able to do that in the NHS before. And the difference that's making to the programme is absolutely enormous. And that's only going to get, it's only going to improve our ability to manage healthcare conditions in the long run.
Yeah, Paul, if I may add, you have all of that within the NHS coupled with a patient demographic now who are so conscious of their healthcare now, more conscious than ever, more desire in them accessing their data and wanted to know more about their own, whether it be their own statistics, let's just say. So you've got this huge wave now of, we've seen it in the primary care world, particularly where traditionally it was reactive care. And we've done a lot of things over the past 10, 20 years around prevention is cure and prevention. But how can you get an 18-year-old or 20-year-old conscious about their healthcare? Usually an event has to happen for them to get conscious of their healthcare. When you're at that age, you're untouchable. You feel like Superman or woman at that point. But now we've got this period of very conscious patients from all age demographics also now demand that hadn't been seen before of, I want to be seen because I'm feeling X, Y, and Z. Now, a lot of it is around mental health, but there are things of, once upon a time, if I had X, Y, and Z, I'm just going to leave it to the side. But I think what COVID has certainly done from a patient population perspective is getting us more conscious about our healthcare, and with more consciousness, there's naturally more demand for naturally a struggling moment in time. And I think probably one thing before I forget, because I really don't want to forget this point, because I think it's very important. I think it was Tim, it may have been Tim or Raj who mentioned it around clinician burnout. It is a very, very real issue. It's a very real point, and it's been documented quite a lot. And I think one thing that we've noticed, so we offer it as well, but we've noticed that there isn't much support going there. We haven't seen programs for clinicians. So we launched a program called Your Health Matters Too, which ultimately supports clinicians with their mental health. And, and it's quite important. And I don't think enough of that gets done. I think it's, okay, clinician, you're burnt out, take 2 weeks off and come back when you're less burnt out. And that's just not the way. I mean, in a way, clinicians are patients too, right? And we need to make sure we get that part of things correct as well to keep it sustainable.
Absolutely. I'll come back to the clinician burnout point if I may, but I don't want to lose sight of the data point we've been discussing, because certainly that seems to resonate with a number of people here. Like Anne and others have made the point in the chat that, kind of having to re-explain your history to a new doctor that you're meeting in a waste of time. And, people in the chat seem to like the concept of video consultation and the ability to email. But is there a risk here that that patient data basically becomes a commodity that can be exploited by the system? So many people on this call will work with large data sets, be painfully aware of PII and GDPR regulations and things like that. Do you, maybe kind of coming back to you again, Wais, do you see a risk, because from the private sector looking into this patient data of patient data become commoditized and companies beginning to see an ethical line in terms of how they use it? I mean, what safeguards do you think we need here?
Yeah. I mean, I think, being completely transparent, I think every single sector has the same problem, and more importantly in healthcare, where it is the most sensitive of all data. So a lot of the work that we've done with NHS and NHSD, X and NHSD, has heavily been around procurement frameworks. So, what I saw over the past year, being quite frank about it, I saw a bit of Wild West activity where I'd seen providers just coming into the sector having access to data without going through proper procurement, proper framework, etc. And I don't want to knock it too much because we were in a pandemic, but now we're hopefully getting out of it. There are learnings here, and I think the key work that we've done with NHS and NHSD, X and D, has been is how do we get those who are going to access data to basically qualify for it. So we worked heavily with them on security, on safeguarding, and what all those programs look like. And the output of that has been there are a number of different frameworks where if you are going to, say, be a partner of an NHS provider, you have to be on particular frameworks. These frameworks have been insured by the NHS. And ultimately, once going through those regulations, that includes GPDPR, that includes ISO 27001, et cetera, et cetera. So once you are qualified in all of that, then you have the permission per se, and the assurance to access that. Now, of course, there is still some legislation around this, and there is patient consent to it as well. So from a push doctor perspective, we've got all the sign off from NHS and everything is secure from that perspective. But then prior to consultation, we very, very clearly at 2 separate times let the patient know if they are comfortable in the data being accessed by the clinician using them. Because how push doctor does work is you do have your clinician, the clinician is an NHS doctor, it's a doctor based in the UK, but it may not be the one that you're used to going to within practice. So it'll be somebody who is, Manchester practice, somebody in England, in London. So being comfortable with that person accessing your data. If you say no, fine, they won't access the data, but they will talk to you and consult you, et cetera, et cetera. But I think how we get regulation, how we get companies accessing this data, and legislation to back it, because a big piece here is there is always going to be a company with the wrong ethical values. You cannot avoid it. There are going to be companies who say, oh my God, healthcare records, I can sell it, big pharma, et cetera, et cetera. That is going to happen. And through legislation, through frameworks, we have to control that.
Paul, can I just jump in on that point? Actually, I think, and it's what's been written in the chat about Palantir as a commercial organisation. It is a commercial organisation, and I think, just going back, I think the GDPR rules in the NHS are very strict, even to the point that I could never, even in the position that I hold, I can never see patient records. Exactly. I can see proxy records, but I could never see patient identifiable. The only people who can actually see that are the doctors who are looking after the patients. In every A&E department, in every hospital, you can access the GP records. They've got the ability to do that. And remembering that if you download the NHS app, you've got all of your records. If your practice has released it, I look at my app, I can see all my records going back to when I was a kid, sitting there on the NHS app. So people have access to their records already. It's just making sure we keep that safe. And I feel the NHS does that very well. But companies such as Palantir are now entering into the fold of patient level data in a way they probably haven't done before. It's always been relatively internalized within the NHS. So we do need to make sure, or the government need to make sure, that there's very clear guidelines on using data.
Thank you, Tim. And Raj, just a final comment for you on this point before we maybe move on to the topic of clinician burnout, mental health. Do you see these common data sets as the key to unlocking some of the demand across hospitals for you to kind of be able to, kind of get those waiting lists down?
No, I do. I do think common data sets are the key to everything, even from a patient perspective. I was just, as you guys were talking in the background, I just remember a story that a colleague had told me about a patient that he was looking after, and he was about to do an operation on this individual. And the patient himself was a consultant in risk management, I think, from the city, and deals with data sets quite a lot in managing risk. And he comes into the hospital. I hope you don't mind me telling this, but he comes into the hospital and he's, as you do, you get asked, what's your name? What's your full name, your date of birth, and do you have, as part of this, do you have any allergies? And he had an allergy, so he told them, yeah, I've got this allergy to this. So then he moves up to the next floor. And then someone asks him, okay, so, my name's this, what's your name? What's your date of birth? What's this? And then what's your allergy? So he's like, okay, I've got an allergy to this. And he goes up to another part of the hospital where he has to have a scan, and someone asks him the same question. Then he comes back and goes to the room, and someone says, what's your name? What's your, date of birth? What are your allergies? He says it again. And then suddenly, just before he's going into the hospital, into the operating theatre, they ask him the same question again. What is your name? All of the checks that we do, and what are your allergies? And at that point, he packed his bags and left the hospital. And the reason he did that when we called him up afterwards was that he said, I work in risk management, and I cannot believe the number of times I've seen people where there's a potential for error. Surely, if I've given you the answer once, it should be on my records and everyone knows accurately. And it's where the double checking happens, and when you have to fill in the same sort of information again and ask the same information again and again and again, you start to make error. So he just lost faith in the whole process, and it just kind of reminds me of the story of of how everything does need to be joined up in some sort of a way. I mean, clearly this is an extreme example, and we do have our, we have moral, and we've got duties to check people's allergies before surgery. But it just shows that the same information is being given again and again at different points, and at no point is anything joined up. So it's just an amusing anecdote. And I do think actually joined up data is going to help with various things, including managing waiting lists, because if you can collaborate with every hospital has its own waiting list issues, and we all work in networks. Certain hospitals do a lot more cancer work. Certain hospitals have the equipment to do very complicated work. Or need to work in specific teams, but there's also a lot of lower level procedures or easy, not as technically demanding procedures that can be done and done outside, major teaching hospitals. And so by having that data together and understanding waiting lists appropriately, you can sort of pool waiting lists together and distribute cases across network hospitals rather than having everything dealt with yourself. And your major capacity issue may be dealing with, complicated cancer work or neurosurgery or cardiac surgery.
No, absolutely. And I think it's interesting to see the chat coming through on this, Raj. I mean, people, I think, it resonates with what people see here and can kind of take that back to their businesses as well, isn't it? And it's good to see. Thank you for Tim for answering some of the questions in the chat, and I'll come back.
Sorry, I thought I would whilst I had a small hiatus.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I'd like just to move on. I think, in different ways, all three of you have mentioned burnout. And with Mental Health Week upon us next week, I'd like just to briefly touch on that, because the NHS, for all the obvious reasons, has been an area where people have seen that. We've seen many things on the news about people burning out within that. Wais, maybe if I could just start with yourself. In terms of what you see coming through, from a push doctor perspective, have you seen an increase in mental health patients now that many people are contemplating a return to the office? Is there a link there?
Yeah, no, certainly. I think it's quite remarkable, actually, because what we saw was a huge demand in workers wanting to go back to the office initially, because they were so fed up of working from home, being on Zoom. So there was this huge push on. I think every single company has been very good on a hybrid model of working, and they've kept it quite optional. I haven't seen a company yet who have been, everybody has to come back to the office. They've always left that to the staff. And what we saw initially was the majority of staff moving the hybrid more to in-person, so 4 or 5 days within the office. And I think at the beginning of April the 12th, 13th, where we started seeing people go more and more in the office, we saw on the 26th, I think it was the week commencing 26th, of April, actually a bit of a pullback from staff, because they were just completely overwhelmed from going to their own rooms, video consultations the whole day, Zoom calls, etc., into seeing people, hundreds of people into the new flow, and it was quite remarkable to see. So we actually saw this increase of people coming in, and then we saw a huge peak in anxiety and panic attacks in particular. And ultimately, they then reverted back into wanting to do more hybrid at home as they adjusted to the normal, because it wasn't just going back to the office 9 to 6. It was then having your lunch outside or going to your lunch place, going back on the train, etc., etc. It was getting that routine back, where it felt as though that whole piece had to get approached, had to be phased a bit more. So I think what our companies are doing now is not only how do we support staff members in that, but actually coming from a position of strength to say, actually, going 4 or 5 days in the office, even though you want it, isn't the right thing to do. Let's start off with 1 or 2 days. Let's see how that goes. Let's give that a month and then build it up to 3, 4, 5. And that's, I think that's a position we're all moving to try and become, from all our best practice, actually what is the right hybrid model. I think everybody has put it back on choice, but I think what we've seen quite early on, choice probably, has worked well in some parts, but the majority of the times it hasn't.
Absolutely. And it's a topic that we've touched on a number of times within this forum. And I'll come to you in a second, Tim and Raj, for your perspective on this as well. But if I may, just building on some of the insights that you as an audience have provided to us in previous weeks, I'd like to just try and just run a short poll with you. If you click on the link that you see my team has put in the chat, you'll see there's a simple question. If you click on it, it'll take you, and my team's showing it on the screen now, that asks you, from your organization's perspective, how are you ready and equipped to manage the mental well-being of your workforce as they return to the office, to that hybrid environment? And you'll see some answers to choose from. And if you can do that, it will take you 10 seconds. It's completely anonymous, and we'll just be intrigued to see your answers. But Tim, if I could come back to you just on that while people are filling in that poll.
Yeah.
You've mentioned a few things about kind of burnout in that space, and also kind of volunteers as well, kind of going back to the, as the weather's meant to be getting better. There were some comments in the chat as well about how actually people are struggling to volunteer, but maybe if you could just give us a perspective on, where you see the challenges, morale, across the vaccination program and where it's going.
Just a couple of things, just to remember that clinicians have never been working from home. They've been into their hospitals, their practices, all day, every day, 7 days a week in many cases for the last 14 months. And I think you've got to remember that if you actually look at day-to-day basis, having to adapt so quickly, donning and doffing PPE for every appointment, doing phone triage, some face-to-face, video consultation, the change has been exhausting. And still having to do the day-to-day work on top of all the COVID changes, as well as then the vaccination program, has been the thing that I think is most exhausting for people. So what you've had is clinicians who adapted really quickly. No one's had any holiday because everyone's been working, or their leave was cancelled, or whatever it may be. Having to carry on doing that and doing COVID vac. And now, very clearly, and I have to be careful who my employer is, but the national team at NHS England are absolutely pushing for business as usual. And that business as usual will be different. Earlier in the chat, someone mentioned about face-to-face and video consultation. I think this is the change in general practice, particularly where, and maybe in hospital medicine as well, that the first appointment will either be on the telephone or a video consultation. It's much better for the environment as well, rather than people traveling all the time. And then people will be seen when they need to. I think that's going to require a cultural shift in public expectation. But I also think that doesn't necessarily save clinician time. It certainly saves patient time, but I think it will change the way that it works. I think just looking at, again, public expectation, creating this. I'll give you an example. The medical director, primary care medical director, a lady called Nikki Kanani from NHS England, who some of you will have seen on the press briefings with the Prime Minister. They've opened online consultation. In the last week, they had 700 requests on their online consultation platform. And actually, to the point they had to write out and say, please could people consider self-care first, not at the first sign of a symptom writing to us, because actually online consultation there's no additional capacity for it. It has to be instead of something. So I think actually what we may have created is this monster in that everybody can access whoever they want when they want, which actually, and there's no additional capacity. There are no more clinicians who are able to do this. So I think actually we need a cultural change in the way that healthcare is perceived.
Yeah.
It was, I think, very difficult for some clinicians when people were out on the doorstep clapping at 8 o'clock in the evening, yet at the same point complaining they couldn't get an appointment the next morning and having a dig at their local practice or hospital. So I think that there needs to be a management if we're not going to have an overall, burnout of the workforce. So I'm kind of ranting now, but you see where I'm coming from.
No, I do, and it speaks to a point that Rupert put in the chat as well, just a little earlier about that innovation. The balance between innovation and that digital innovation versus culture and the human side of it as well. Yeah. Just before I come to you, Raj, if I might just ask my team just to show the results of the survey, which kind of range from, number one on the left-hand side will be your businesses aren't doing very much, through to, you can see the winner there by far and away is actually, and that's great to see, that your workplaces are showing significant investment and mental health is treated as a high priority. And that's great to see. That outstrips everything. Just while I come back to Raj, what I would be intrigued by, if you're able just to post in the chat, what is it that your organizations are therefore doing that is so great? Because I think it's things like that that we can learn from. And I'll maybe just kind of open the floor just to comment on that in a moment. But Raj, if I could just come back to you on this mental health point and the, how is morale? How is that being managed? How would you manage it going forward to your team of clinicians that have been working so very hard and probably will continue to be over the coming months?
And no, I totally agree. I think this is a huge thing, and it has these next few months and the way the workforce is managed is really going to determine how people's careers in a way, regardless of whether it's going to be in nursing or as clinicians. During the pandemic, everyone has been working incredibly hard. They've been moved into areas where they're not used to. They're learning and acquiring new skills. They're dealing with things they've never dealt with before. And in doing that, continuously, as Tim says, sometimes 7 days a week, trying to manage these incredibly unwell patients within a hospital. And the honest truth is they are tired. And to then come back to a business as usual makes it very, very difficult, because business as usual is also incredibly tiring, and it's not just business as usual, it's going to be business as usual plus more. People are looking to increase throughput now, and they're going to look to manage these waiting lists and manage the referrals that are coming through a bit more, a lot better. And I totally echo Tim's point about virtual consultations, and it is an amazing adjunct for the right purpose. And it does work certainly for a lot of circumstances, but it doesn't necessarily completely replace certain people who need to have the face-to-face. And it doesn't take away from the time that you need to spend, because often it can take a little bit longer, because you need to be absolutely dead sure as to how you're interacting with that individual, and that they understand where you're from. There's something different about having a face-to-face consultation. There's a lot of evidence to show that it's just as good. But I personally don't tend to operate on people without meeting them. And that's just a personal thing for me. And that's because, you do need to examine their abdomen. You just need to double check what they're like. We've had examples of people listed.
What a time to freeze.
It is. It's getting into the groove there. I'm sure Raj will come back.
For that operation, that particular point in time.
So we lost you for a few seconds there, but
I was just saying, one of the advantages of seeing people is that you can examine them, and you can gauge their surgical risk. The way they stand up, they walk into your consultation room. If they're kind of hobbling up into your consultation room, you start wondering if you examine their abdomens and they've got a huge abdomen with a high BMI, you think, are they really suitable for a particular procedure? Do I need to be a bit cautious? You mentally prepare yourself for these kind of things. So there are some advantages in the face-to-face model as well. And I think you are right, Tim, in that it doesn't replace, you do need to give someone the equal amount of time, and it does you can't just add it on. It still comes at a cost. You still have to replace something with a virtual consultation. But I do think it's here to stay. I definitely do think it's here to stay. With the topic of burnout, I think we've got to be very, very cautious in the National Health Service. I think we're seeing polls coming out in the news all the time. EMA are polling the doctors. 50% of them are looking for a change in career. They're going to retire. They're going to take a sabbatical. They're going to move into a different field. The same thing in the nursing profession. You pay them £3 extra. You hold the nursing pay freeze at the 1% and no more, and then suddenly these are the people who've been working the hardest during the pandemic. Is without a doubt the nursing staff managing these people on intensive care and on the wards, and as it is in central London, we with respect to the nursing staff, we see, in terms of retainership, it's less than 30%. Less than 30% of nurses stay in a single hospital for more than 2 years. And if you start treating that group of highly professional individuals badly, they will just move, because they will move to the next role somewhere else, and they will look for a place where they're feeling more valued.
Just an interesting stat, just to jump onto the back of that. 10 years ago, a full-time GP worked 8 clinical sessions. It's now 6 clinical sessions, plus a day's admin, but still 4 days. But the amount of clinical sessions for what's considered full-time has dropped because of the pressures of workload. And I know that's quite similar, certainly amongst all clinical colleagues, that people are working less because of the pressures, which means that we may still have, the government statistics say we've got as many doctors and nurses as we had before. Yes, but they're just working less, which therefore leaves a gap.
Okay, to throw a difficult question back at you there, though, now that you're warmed up, I mean, we've developed a vaccine in a year. We look at studies that say we're changing things 40 times quicker than we have been previously. We've got this COVID mindset. Why can't we change that? Why can't we create that extra capacity?
I'm not going to get political. Brexit has created an enormous problem. We've got 100,000 nurses short, and a lot of that is because of people not coming in from Europe. Okay, we were robbing Peter to pay Paul. We've got 6 new medical schools came online in the last 2 years, which will, takes 5 years to bring people through. We've underinvested in our clinical education. We need more medical schools. We need a broader education program. Every university should have nursing, pharmacists, new pharmacists, physiotherapists, social care prescribers, people who do incredible things, who add capacity into the system. We're broadening, but just not quick enough.
Okay.
And actually, I think the health service is starting to really recognise that, but unfortunately, the lag time is years, not months. Sorry, that was a bit negative. I didn't
No, not at all. But it just plays to an expectation, certainly one that's coming through on the chat here, and I think it's that tension, isn't it, between innovation and culture and the reality underneath it. So, there's a lot here about how we position this in kind of not sleepwalking back into the past and taking some of the developments over the course of the last 12 months and building on those. And it's great to see some of the chat coming through around what everyone's doing in the mental health space and things that wouldn't have probably been in place 12 months ago. And thank you for all the comments there. That's great to see, and please read those, because there's some great things from confidential helplines to managers attending a 2-day mental health first aid course. Let me just come back to the three of you then to look into your crystal ball. We've seen, as I say, these enormous successes over the course of the last 12 months. How do we keep the momentum here? And what's the change in healthcare going to look like over the course of the next 10 years? And, Wais, if I could just maybe come to you on that first, what needs to happen?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we've done historically has been absolutely brilliant, right? So we've done some, and I agree with Raj, face to face will never be replaced. So if any company comes in and says, video consultations can do 90%, 100%, it is just purely wrong. There's going to be a combination, but I think it's being able to. So if I think about the future and I think about the future of healthcare, I think, well, how does digital and technology plays a huge role? How does it efficiently play a role in this? And I think, the ideal place for me in the next 10 years would be an integrated patient and clinician journey. So how does a patient get a full end-to-end integrated journey, and how does a clinician get a full end-to-end journey? That for me is where I'd love the sector to go to. I think digital technology has a huge role in it. Of course it does. But there are going to be a number of steps for us to fulfill before we get to that.
Thank you, Wais. I'm sorry, we're pushed time. So Tim, I'm going to come to you for a quick wrap up and a quick comment on the same.
I think the flu pandemic is going to give us an amazing opportunity for prevention, because I think that people will be coming in for their vaccine every year. Every contact counts. It gives an opportunity for targeted prevention in groups that we've never had access to or are really hard to get to. People will want their vaccine. It will become part of what people do. It gives huge opportunity to improve healthcare across the country.
Thank you. Raj, final thoughts? Or you're on mute. We got all this way and then...
I think in my world, a lot of it is going to be... I think it's going to be innovative working. Innovative workflow planning is going to be the key for us now. It's going to be managing staff and time more efficiently to see greater efficiencies in cutting sort of waiting lists over the next 5-10 years, and working with other partners, whether it be in the private healthcare sector or it's going to be with other organizations in healthcare technology to try and sort of boost our efficiency in that way. And I think the NHS needs to be a bit more needs to recognize this that it on its own and creating it, making a silo out of itself is probably not the way to go right now, and it's to gain that help from everyone.
And I'm sure ourselves and everyone else here will be delighted to work with you on that, because it's so important. But look, we're at time. I'd just like to say thank you all ever so much to Wais, to Tim, to Raj. Your perspectives have been fascinating. It's really caused a fantastic amount of chat and questions coming through, which is exactly what this forum is about. So thank you ever so much. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question directly, but hopefully we got the spirit of it to Raj and to Wais and to Tim, and I know that some of those are being answered directly. There'll be a video of this forum posted on our website, so please look at that. Feel free to share with your colleagues, friends, and your LinkedIn contacts. Next week, we're going to be looking at the future of social justice, the underprivileged, and whether there needs to be a shift in our corporate moral imperatives to be taking more action in this space. So until then, once again, thank you to Raj, to Tim, to Wais. It's been fantastic. Thank you ever so much.
Cheers, Paul. Thanks all very much.
It's a pleasure. And on behalf of my team, Creativity here, Robert Half, send you all our best wishes. Be safe, be bold, be kind to each other, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Cheers,
thanks, everyone.
All the best.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.